My name is Garrett Sims. Welcome back to Sports Timeout. Last week we got to sit down with Brett Jewell, head coach of the OHS Football Bulldogs. This week we get to sit down with Wellington Napoleons, Andy Hampton, head coach of the Tigers. It was great to sit down with Andy because I got to follow his team last year, and to get to know him a little bit more was awesome, and I can't thank him enough for his time. It was a great conversation. He let me know a little bit about the team this year, which I think they're going to have a very good squad. I'm excited to see what they do. And with all that being said, let's get into the episode right now. Before we start this episode, we want to give a special shout out to the Bank of Odessa for supporting Sports Timeout. Bank of Odessa has been locally owned and operated since 1880. They have 4 locations, 2 in Odessa, 1 in Oak Grove, and 1 in Lamont. You'll find them at bankofodessa.com, member FDIC. My name is Garrett Sims. I have a very special guest, head coach of the Wellington Napoleon Football Tigers. Thank you for joining me, Coach Andy Hampton. I'm excited to have you, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, excited to be here, and really appreciate you doing this for all of us area schools that you cover. And I usually listen on a weekly basis, so it's nice to be here.
I can't thank you enough for your support, and literally your kind words have meant a lot to me and Corey. It means a lot to me that you actually watch and listen, and so I can't thank you enough for that, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to get into asking a little bit about you because I didn't have you as a coach. So I just wanted to ask you, where did football begin for you, and what kind of fueled your passion for the game?
Well, I'm originally from Oak Grove, and so, I've been very familiar with the area my whole life. I was very fortunate to be on some really good high school football teams at Oak Grove when I was going through. Was able to start as a freshman at quarterback, and had a lot of good running backs. My job was easy, kind of hand the ball off right and hand the ball off left that first year. But, I had a very influential coach in high school, and Coach Brad Gaines, and he really fueled my fire for football. My dad had a huge impact on me as well growing up throughout sports. And so, I'm a huge proponent of sports in general, but there's no greater team game I feel like than football. And so just the lessons that you learn from being a part of a team just take you to places you never thought you'd go. And fortunately I've been very lucky to be around a lot of good football programs. I went to college at Northwest Missouri State right after they kind of started their dynasty going up there, and played for a Hall of Fame coach there, and then came back to Oak Grove for a few years and coached, and ended up at Wellington and been there the last 19 years, and learned under Coach Quentin Bainbridge. And so like I said, I've been very fortunate and been around great people in the football perspective of my life.
And I want to ask you a little bit about Oak Grove because you had All-State honors there, and I wanted to say, was it 2002 All-State quarterback Andy Hampton?
No, I actually wasn't ever All-State there. I graduated 2000.
2000?
But like I said, we had a great run. We had 3 undefeated conference championships. My senior year, we made the quarterfinals, lost to the state champs, Aurora, that year, and so like I said, we had some great teams there, and so, I got hurt my sophomore year playing there, and so to be able to overcome that in the end was something big for me personally, but like I said, been around a lot of great people there, and great experience.
And I want to ask you a little bit about Coach Gaines. Is there any advice that he kind of gave you throughout your playing career that you might use to this day still?
Well, oh yeah, we still stay in touch. We're great friends. We talk on a weekly basis. That relationship that I was able to build with him, and the impact that he had on my life, then we still carry today. My kids call him Grandpa, and so I was very fortunate to go back to Oak Grove and coach with him as well for a few years, to be on that perspective right out of college, and so. I still call him coach, and, he still coaches me to this day, and I listen to him that way. And so, just the life lessons that he taught us then were, I still carry today, and learned a lot from him. he was a hard-nosed coach, and some people don't take well to that, but it was one of those that I was always motivated by it, and knew that he was trying to do it to just get the most out of me and most out of our team, and just a huge impact on me.
And I want to ask you, kind of with the coaching, when did you know coaching was for you, and how did that kind of come about?
Well, I knew I always wanted to be a teacher. I figured that out when I was in elementary school. I liked school, and I loved my teachers, and they had a huge influence on me. And once you get into junior high and high school, and you start having those school coaches, have that impact on you, that's when I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. And like I said, when I got to college, immediately I was majoring in education, and I knew I wanted to coach. I went back in the summer at Oak Grove and helped out with their summer weights program and some football camps and basketball camps and things like that. And so just to be able to have that interaction with the kids at that time to really get a feel for it, that's when I knew that, I really wanted to be a coach.
And I want to ask you a very certain question, but this was a quote from one of the stories that I kind of found a little bit back. And it said, "My goal is to always make sure we are teaching and molding good young men." And I love that about you. And I just wanted to ask you, where did that kind of come from, and why does it mean so much to you?
Well, it kind of all started with Coach Gaines in high school, but also my college coach, Mel Churchma. He's a Hall of Fame coach, and he's in the College Football Hall of Fame now. And the culture that he preached when I was at Northwest was family. And, we still carry that with us today. Alumni would come back and treat us like we were just their little brothers. And we're doing that now today to that next, chapter of Bearcat football up there at Northwest. And so, he was just such a people person, and we didn't wear our hats at team meal and, stuff like that. And so I just feel like, what you need to be, a good young man in society, a good father, all the lessons you can learn to help you that are from a football team. And, I just knew that I wanted to take those traits that they had taught me and try to instill those in our players today.
And so I want to go a little bit to Wellington and ask you, when did you start coaching for Wellington? And so far, what has it meant to you to represent the Tigers in your coaching career?
Well, it's kind of a funny story, really. I got there in 2008, and Coach Bainbridge was there, and it was always funny just because I had known the Bainbridge name from Oak Grove, and Oak Grove and Odessa are such huge rivals, and my family was kind of a old school Oak Grove name, and the Bainbridges are very well known in Odessa, and so I always told him, I joked, I said it's weird that an Oak Grove and Odessa guy are coming together to try to do something right for somebody else, and we always kind of laughed about it and razzed each other about it. But, the relationship I was able to build with him was really special. And, we still talk today, and he had a big influence on me, and he gave me a lot of opportunities to grow as a coach. Wellington, he kind of had me be the offensive coordinator for our tenure together, and we worked really well together, I thought, and had a lot of great moments. We've had some great teams at Wellington due to a lot of great players that have came through there, and so my time there has been awesome. Wellington's a great community and a great school. It really reminds me a lot of Oak Grove when I was growing up, and so it was a very easy transition for me to go from Oak Grove to there. I had played some summer baseball with some guys from Wellington in high school and stuff like that, so very familiar with it. And, like I said, the school is the community. And so the support over there is just tremendous. And, that hasn't changed over the 19 years I've been there. So it's just a great place to be.
And I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit more about the community. What has it meant to have their support? And obviously, last year was my first year at Wellington games. I love that atmosphere, and what makes Wellington so special?
Well, like I said, we get great support from everybody, alumni, the community. Anytime we need something, we need a fundraiser dinner, we need, volunteers for this or that, the community just comes together. And, we've got great kids over there that are always willing to help, and call and say, hey, we got a little kids camp tonight. I need 10 football guys to come run it. They show up. Anything like that. We have stuff that we volunteer on the weekends for at school, fundraisers, whatever. We get great support from that too. So, parents are always willing to help out with anything that we need. And so, they just basically, the support that we get there is tremendous. And honestly, we wouldn't be able to function without that support. So we're very thankful for the community we have there.
Yes, sir. And kind of something I want to touch on, because I think this kind of goes back to the rivalries we were talking about. And it was a quote from you about the questions I'd asked you for this fall sports preview. And it was about how great it was for your team to play some of Wellington Napoleon's old rivalries. And so I wanted to kind of ask you, what does it mean to get to see these games again and the atmospheres that come with them? And what does it mean for your teams to go and play these traditional matchups?
Yeah, when I first came to Wellington, we had a great rivalry with Concordia and Oric and Santa Fe. Those were kind of our three big ones when I first came to Wellington. And, that was just something that was instilled in the community. Our kids just bought into that. They're playing those schools in every other sport they play there. When kind of the I-70, half of them kind of went to 8-man, and we lost that, we were having to travel hour and a half, 2 hours to play most of our games, with the exception of Crestridge and Lone Jack. But over the last 10 years or so, Crestridge became a really big rivalry for us, kind of for that purpose. But, our kids were playing Concordia, Santa Fe, Oric, St. Paul, Sweet Springs. We're playing them in every other sport, but not football. So when we were having to go 2 hours to play a football game, it was, the energy and intensity is a huge part of football.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going to play somebody that's you don't really know, like, it's hard to get them kind of fired up for stuff, Hey, guys, we're going to go play Coal Camp this week. Like, okay, who's that? It was all so new to us. And so for having to be able to come back and these kids be like, okay, I know this guy from Concordia, I know this guy from Oric, and through basketball, through track, through baseball, and now for them to like get to do it on the football field, that was just a whole new energy that they hadn't felt. And so, our practices just got amped up a little bit more. Pre-game got a little bit amped up more because now they're really excited. And, that's the fun part about being a part of high school sports is you develop those rivalries and, the competition part, little bragging rights, and so this year, like, our kids just said how much fun it was to kind of finally have that opportunity. So I know they're just looking forward to that again.
And I didn't have this question down, but you just reminded me of something. Was the first time I'd ever seen a team do this, and I wanted to ask you because it was on your field. What did you think about the opposing team having their own walkout banner? And not that I'm trying to get negative or anything, Coach Hampton, that's the first time I've seen anything like that.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of that. Our kids said something, and I found out about it after the game. But, to me, that stuff I think is all in fun. I
good
think,
camaraderie.
Yeah, I think it's good. Because when somebody does that to you, it's probably like, oh, it just gives you that little extra energy boost to want to win a little bit more. And so. I'm sure there's teams that kind of say that about us. We have a drummer from our drum line that does a little drum beat just for us as we walk out to the field, and stuff like that. That's a tradition we've had at Wellington. And so, I think it was all in good fun. We used to call that game, I think it was Oric that maybe did that. We used to call that game the Rumble on the River. And, when it kind of went away, when they had split to 8-man, we lost that. But, talking with their coaches, they've got an alumni that's taken over for them this year, and he's really wanting to try to revive their program back to what it was. Because when I first came to Wellington, they were winning state titles, every year with Coach Pat Richards. And so, he talked to me and he's like, man, I'd love to try to just get that back between both communities, and because it was a big respect rivalry type. And so, that was the first time for that. And I think, it didn't bother me as much, at all. But, of course, our kids are like, did you see that? And I was like, hey, man, just use it as motivation, for sure.
As some could say, bulletin board material,
Right.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about these teams. I know there's not like a favorite matchup or anything, but and I know you touched on this with Oric, but out of the old traditional rivalries, is there one that you value maybe more or looking forward to this season?
I think when I first came to Wellington, we really had some good battles with Concordia. And looking at our school's history, they were the one school that we had played in football more than any other team in the program's history. So, to me, and we had a couple years there. We had, in 2011, we were both 1-2 in the state and played on our homecoming, and it was an epic game, back and forth. And it's moments like that that just kind of fuel that fire. And it worked out last year to where we both were undefeated in the conference, playing in week 9 or week 10 of the season. And we were like, that was perfect. It's a rivalry game. It's for the conference title. Like, we're both undefeated in conference. Like, who wouldn't want that? And talking to their coach, Jordan Tyler, this summer, he was like, man, that was awesome. Like, wouldn't it be cool if that worked out every year? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great, And so, I think that's one that definitely, when you look back about when we were kind of all the I-70 together, I always felt like it was for about 5 or 6 years to end that. It was kind of us and them for the conference title. And so to have that back again last year really revived that a little bit. And so, I think that's definitely a game that, their kids and our kids are going to probably really be pumped up for.
Yes, sir. And one of the things that you're kind of talking about here is I love your relationships with the other coaches and how you guys, I think your passion for football obviously speaks for itself, but I think you guys coming together and loving these rivalries and these traditional games, I think it says a lot about what you guys are trying to do. And I'm excited because I love that name, Rumble on the River. That's such an awesome name. And I'm excited to watch you guys this season play them guys and all that stuff. But that's such a cool thing as a coach to be able to have those type of relationships with these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I was, kind of on my end, the same way as the players. When we had broke away from the I-70, I didn't have a relationship with a lot of those guys that we were playing, and so, it wasn't by anybody's fault. It's just, we don't play them anything else, so you don't have that rapport with them. But last year when we came in back to the I-70 in football, all the coaches in the league were so welcoming to us and to me, and it was just a huge relief for me to be able to have that experience. And I greatly respect all those guys because they have treated us just like the new kid that's coming in, and hey, we'll help you out with anything you need. And the whole 8-man community has actually been that way. Even the guys that were up north that we went to camp with and stuff, tremendous guys, very helpful, very supportive. At the All-State meeting last year, we're all in a room just to see the respect that everybody had for each other was just awesome. It makes you feel good as a professional, and that's what these guys are, professional. And so, I couldn't ask for a better group of colleagues to work and coach against because they all are very supportive and show great respect to everybody's program.
Yes, sir. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about 8-Man. I know we've talked about it a lot, but and I want to talk about that community because I don't know if you were aware of the they have an 8-Man community group on Facebook, and I love it because they are just so in tune with trying to get all the information and statistics. I didn't know if you knew about that because that's such an awesome way that the 8-Man community really gets the information out there and welcomes people. Like 8-Man is a little bit different. It's a lot. It's a totally different kind of thing from 11-man. And so to be able to sit there and have these people that make it a lot easier to swallow some of these things and concepts, I think it's a really cool thing.
Yeah, they are a great resource. We kind of started becoming familiar with them last summer, and they do a great job of covering the schools in the 8-man community. Posting weekly stats and some videos and trying to get to a game and live stream a game and stuff like that. And so, our kids are aware of that. We follow it all the time, and they do a weekly show, kind of like this, on their Facebook page, and they live stream it and kind of give a preview of the next week's games. And so it's really cool to follow and makes you feel good that people are paying attention and they know our players and know about them. And so yeah, it's just a great thing to have. Our kids have never really had that, and being from a small school, we don't get a ton of coverage like that. You guys give us great coverage, but other than that, nobody else really does anything for us. And so to have that out there for our parents and our community and our kids, like, it was great. Our kids, they love it, and so it's just been awesome to be a part of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think they even live streamed a couple of your guys' games, and I think that's just so awesome for maybe the people, once it gets a little bit colder, that can't make it out to the games and stuff, to be able to sit there and still support their Tigers. That's just such an awesome thing.
Yeah, we have that, and Huddle has done a wonder for all of that too. Especially and to have that access, just to put yourself out there, especially for a small school like us, it's a great feeling.
And I know 8-man's kind of been a tougher adjustment just because of speed of the game and stuff, but I want to ask you, as a coach, what's been the biggest challenge for you?
Well, I think, last year it took us about 4 weeks to kind of get the speed figured out. And, we realized we had to just buckle down and change just a little bit of things. I think the biggest difference for me, offensively, I'm an offensive guy. I've always been an offensive guy. So, over the past probably 6-7 years when I became a head coach, that's really the first time I've had to really buckle down and focus on some defensive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As an offensive guy, I always knew what gave me fits, and things like that. But to really look at scheme and stuff like that on the defensive side, it was definitely a learning curve for me. But the one thing I think on the defensive side of 8-man from 11-man is, you don't really have an opportunity to do a lot of stemming and blitzing and things like that. Like it's pretty much, we got a line here, and you better control your gap, and you better make the tackle. Because one of the best, piece of advice I think I heard from a person that was transitioning from 11 to 8-man, a 20-yard play in an 11-man game is a touchdown in an 8-man game, because there's nobody left out there. So if they're down the field 20 yards, you're probably not having anybody left to make that tackle. And so, we made the change last year of just strictly, let's really work on tackling. Let's really work on our pursuit and flow to the ball and see what that does. And once we really kind of just focused on those two things on the defensive side, I felt like we kind of took off a little bit. On the offensive side, like I said, we haven't changed a ton of what we used to do on 11-man. We just, say, hey, we can still run this counter play. We just don't have this one guy, or vice versa, So the passing game is definitely a little tougher because, you've got 3 or 4, and, there's always going to be one guy that you can't account for, which was the same in 11. But instead of coming from maybe 7 yards away in 11-man, he's coming from about 4. And so it's all faster for the quarterback, and so we had to figure out, how can we handle that on the offensive side. And I thought we did a pretty good job of that by the end of the year.
And I just wanted to ask you, because I know you are a little bit more offensive-minded, how do you adjust your passing attack to some of those quicker schemes and stuff?
Well, we used to make a living in Wellington off throwing hot routes. And, a lot of teams with blitzes, because over the years we were more of a passing team. And defenses would try to take that away by just sending heat. And so we always tried to make sure we could counter that with something short and quick. In the 8-man game, sometimes it's hard because everybody is so close. You might be a little bit deeper type situation, or you might have to run a few more screens and things like that. So, the 8-man game definitely creates a lot more one-on-one opportunities in all phases of the game. Offensive linemen are pretty much on an island. They're one-on-one a lot. Wide receivers, DBs, it's more one-on-one. You can play zone in 8-man, but it's a little tougher because there's such a huge hole because you don't have as many guys. But, like I said, we haven't changed a whole lot in our passing scheme from the last few years. We had a lot of, we ran a lot of empty and 4 wide stuff in our last year of 11-man, and we kind of just tried to transfer that over here to 8, and we pretty much just lose one guy. And so that route's not there. So you can solo up a guy a lot easier maybe in 8-man and still be able to maybe take advantage on your trip side and things like that. But it hasn't changed a ton for us.
And I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit more about, so get a little bit more into this season and last season a little bit. But I wanted to ask you, because these guys were incredible athletes, and you kind of spoke about it with the one-on-ones. And I think sometimes with 8-man, you can see some of these great athletes just do their thing. And I want to ask you a little bit about Joe Heater, Jared Raymond, and Max Blystone. They were so spectacular to watch last season, and I know you're going to miss those guys. But what was so special about these group of guys?
Well, for me personally, those guys I was able, my son is a year younger than them, so they were the first group of kids that I was able to help coach in fourth grade, I think, is when we started with them. And so being in that community, and being able to be a part of their athletic career pretty much their whole life was really special for me. Maddox, Joe, and Jared, they're, number one, they're three amazing kids. Great kids in our community, in our school, tremendous athletes, they really picked it up good. And, Maddox was one that we moved everywhere. In his career, he played every position, I think, but I think it was guard. And, to be the athlete, to be able to do that was just special. And he always, and took it with pride and did what we asked him to do. Joe really came from his junior year to his senior year was amazing. I mean, he had a huge turn. He had a great year at receiver last year. I do think like he was an all-state DB for us, but I think if you could have made all-state on both sides of the ball, he would have been an all-state receiver too. And Jared just has an unbelievable motor that, for an undersized guy playing nose guard, his quickness and his speed was just amazing, and he never ran out of gas.
Such a relentless.
Yeah, I mean, he knew one way to play, and it showed. Him and Joe actually got to play at an all-star game this summer, and Jared was everywhere. and the coaches even talked about him, like, man, that guy's just going everywhere. I was like, yeah, that's just how he plays, and so, those three were huge contributors to us, and, we're only losing three, which was good, but they're three pretty important people.
Huge leaders and tremendous athletes.
Yeah, and so, but we've got some kids that were able to get a lot of reps at their positions last year that we feel like hopefully can step in and do a good job for for what they were doing for us as well. And so, to have that experience back hopefully will pay off for us.
And I was going to say, too, you got 10 returning seniors this year. That's a great number. It's a lot of returning talent. And what just gets you so excited about this upcoming season?
Well, I think our kids, like I said, they've never really experienced what it's like to be in a big game. And we were able to get that opportunity last year. And, for them to be in those games, I think now with that experience, that will definitely help pay off for them moving forward. But they've been a hungry group. I mean, our summer stuff has went great. Our attendance at weights was awesome. We have 5-on-5, which is like 7-on-7, an 11-man game. We did that all summer long. Great attendance there, executed well. And so they've been a real focused, driven group so far this summer. And I'm just hoping that will continue to carry on here as we start next Monday. And so they've been good leaders. They've been good to the younger kids and trying to show them the way. And so, they've grown a lot up just, mature-wise here in these last few years. And so I think they're just ready for that challenge, and hopefully we'll have some success with it.
And how does that just help you out as a coach when they're taking the right steps and you feel good about where they're going, that it makes your job as a coach easier?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Our coaching staff was talking about that the last few weeks in camp. We're just like, after a few days, we'd say, okay, how'd your sessions go? And they're like, man, it's just so nice to not have to teach everything so new or really buckle down on this. Like, we said one word, and those older guys just jumped in right then and boom, went with it. And then they actually were helping the younger guys, and I was like, I didn't even really have to say anything in my drill. And I was like, that's perfect. That's what we want from those guys. That's leadership. And so, that has been nice coming in here to this season. Just for me personally, I'm moving into a new position at school. And so, for me, it's taken a lot more time. And so I kind of feel like I'm a little behind with where I normally are with football right now. But to know that I've got that experience with our team, it's made it a lot easier.
And I kind of want to ask you a little bit about unfinished business. That's kind of the team motto this year. I really like that. And so, we kind of talked about the steps and stuff, but what's your message to the team and kind of to make sure that this goal is accomplished?
Well, I just felt like that. I'm a big motto guy. If you ask any of my former basketball or football players, they'd always, usually when the season's coming around, that's the first question, what's our motto going to be this year, and stuff. And so I just feel like teams can buy into that, and this year going with that, I feel like, like I said, those guys got a taste of what it felt like to be in big games, and we came up short both times we were in those, and so I just look at it as we had a job to do, guys, and we didn't get it done, and so let's say that the school has hired us to do this job for our football program, and we didn't do it, so we got unfinished business, and we got to try to have that mentality and be ready to come and do everything that we can to put ourselves in the best situation possible to be in those situations again and hopefully find a way to win them.
Yes, sir. And I wanted to ask you, I can't go without asking this, but Johnny, your son, I've loved watching him play quarterback. He's such an amazing athlete. I know I asked you this, but again, what's it like to watch him grow over the past 4 years as a quarterback and as your son? I mean, it's such a special thing that most people don't get to really coach their kids, and so you've got to do it at one of the highest levels. What has that meant to you?
It's meant a lot, and I can't believe it's his senior year. Like, it's went by so fast with that. But, talking as a coach about him, he's got the leadership skills that, you want as a quarterback. Mm-hmm. He's the first guy out to the practice field, things like that. He's going to every drill, trying to be the first one there. Those are things you want from a guy that's playing that position. He's a good vocal leader. He really puts in a lot of time outside of practice, on his own time. He's gathering receivers to go throw routes. He does stuff at home in the backyard. I mean, he puts in that extra time, and he's one that's always kind of had to work. He's I wouldn't say he's the greatest athlete, but he's a good athlete. Mm-hmm. And he knows that, and so he knows there's some things that he has to really push himself to get better at, and that's never been a problem with him. He's always been one to try to push himself to be the best that he can be. From a dad perspective, I know a lot of people probably say it's easy to be the coach's kid, but in reality, it's probably the hardest thing you can do because they're usually getting the flack at home and on the field, and so
from all the buddies, and
from
all
the
that
buddies,
stuff.
yeah, and so it's not an easy thing, but I feel like we've done a good job of trying to balance that over the years, and I with his senior year, I know I need to make a few changes and try to take and soak that moment in with him, this year as it's a senior year as well as a dad. But knowing as a coach of what we can possibly be capable of as a team, to be able to shoot for those goals and set those goals for us, as a family too at home, it's hopefully will be a special time.
Yes, sir, Coach Hampton. That's all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just, like I said, I greatly appreciate what you've started here, and, appreciate all your coverage last year of us as a program. And, I look forward to reading the paper every week. Sometimes I get criticized with, you still read the paper? Yeah, I do.
I love it. I love the support.
So love listening to it. I think this is great at what you're doing for our kids around, Oak Grove, Odessa, and Wellington. And, if there's ever anything we can do to help you out or have you over for whatever, feel free to ask out. And like I said, just appreciate all the coverage and support.
Thank you, Coach Hampton. I can't appreciate your time enough, and your support's meant a lot to me. And once again, just can't thank you enough for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode of the podcast this week. And again, a big thank you to Coach Andy Hampton for taking the time and coming down to talk with me. It meant a lot, and it was a great conversation. With fall sports, obviously, me and Corey are going to get back into the regular here soon. In the meantime, be sure you're picking up your copy of the Odessan to get all the other news and other sports scores and updates that you may be missing. With that being said, I'll quit my yapping, and we'll see you next episode.